Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. This panel is Social Media Mania. I am not Sabril Bennett. I am a good friend of hers, and I am filling in for her. My name is Retha Hill. I am the director of the New Media Innovation Lab at the Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University. And this panel workshop is all about social media. What's new, why you should do it, how you should do it well, and what traps to avoid. As we all know, I think that social media is the growth sector of the information economy. Networks such as Facebook and Twitter are growing by double digits month to month. Facebook has more than 225 million members, and Twitter has more than 23 million unique visitors. Social media growth is in every sector. 54% of Fortune 100 companies are on Twitter. 55% of Twitter's audience is international. Facebook's fastest growing block is the 35 to 49-year-olds, not just the young people. When you talk about blogging, which I nearly love blogging. I know I've been quoted as saying I hate it, but I've changed my mind. There are more than 112 million English language blogs and more than 73 million Chinese language blogs out there. And these statistics are about a year old, so it's just growing phenomenally. To make sense of all of this, we have a wonderful panel of experts. We have, Barbara Iverson, who is a professor of journalism at Columbia College in Chicago, and she is the co-publisher and editor of ChicagoTalks.org, which is a community and citizen media site, and she's a long-time blogger. We also have J.D. Lassica, who is the founder of socialmedia.biz, which is a social media consulting company that works with Fortune 500 companies and medium-sized companies worldwide. He is also the founder of socialbright.org, which is a social media learning hub. Steve Fox, our last panelist, is a multimedia journalism instructor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He's a former editor of WashingtonPost.com, and he is the co-author of Journalism 2.0, How to Survive and Thrive, a digital literacy guide for the information age. Our panelists are going to give presentations, and then we want to leave time for questions. We only have an hour, so we're going to zip through all of this and hopefully have a really good conversation about social media. So I'm going to start now with Barbara.
Thank you. I'd like to say that I do know that Twitter is SMS for the digital immigrants, and so for those of you that are digital natives, just bear with us a little bit. What that means is my students are all telling me they don't use Twitter, and it's for people that haven't used SMS, but maybe we can talk about that later. Steve is going to be monitoring our Twitter feed, so if you want to Twitter questions during the presentations, you can. I've experimented with having the tweet screen on the, having Twitter up on the screen while you present, and half the audience thinks it's really good, and the other half think it's the worst thing in the world. So Twitter Steve, and he'll convey questions to us. Not what I wanted to do. Okay, the first thing that I was thinking about social media and the history, and this is kind of a joke because the history is not very long, but I think one of the first things was phone phreaking. So in phone phreaking, you had analog people, people with their analog Captain Crunch whistles blowing into the phone and being able to communicate worldwide. So I think that people have wanted to communicate widely, and they just are going to hack the technology. So what I like about some of the social media is it's bringing, we don't have to be hackers. We can use these kind of things in a legal way. Okay. The 1990s with the World Wide Web was the rise of blogging, and that is certainly a form of sharing, connecting, but it's not in real time usually. So, you know, it was an effort, like you could write something, people could respond to you personally, which is, you know, what we want with social media, but it's not real time. What I'm finding now is instead of blogging going away, it's interesting to me, I've seen more and more people, like a friend of mine that never has had a blog, and he's like in Second Life all the time, but he said he's going to start a blog now because he needs like Grand Central Station of his social media. So there might be a movement for that. So at one time maybe blogging appeared to be like a really fast-paced thing, but now with your friend feeds and the different feeds, you might pull them into a blog to kind of have a central place, or, you know, the brand me spot on the web. P2P, BitTorrent, Napster, Pirate Bay are another form of sharing. Those are more where we're sharing stuff with each other, but we can't have a conversation while we're sharing. And I think these are where there's going to be some big educational, like open licensing kind of issues for all kinds of content creators around the free culture and you know, permission culture in the future. Okay, some social media sharing sites came along then next. And those would be like MySpace, Friendster, Facebook, Bebo, Orkut. That's, again, it was sharing, talking to each other, being connected with people, but it's not quite real time. You know, you get an email or something telling you to go to your social media site, but it's not, you know, it's not being connected at that exact minute. So we can again talk about those. And already those sites are old enough that we've seen like the rise of MySpace and then sort of the fall of MySpace. I don't know what's up with Friendster. I think maybe it's gone now. And Facebook is having some interaction with Twitter now, and there's people that are saying, oh, Twitter will kill Facebook, and that we don't know yet what will happen. All right, then we come to the social media tools, and I would say these are the Twitter and the Twitter-like tools. And these tools that are listed here, JD is going to go into more detail with them. We probably could have spent the whole time just showing you the names of Twitter applications and different social media tools, but we just picked out our favorites, I guess, and ones that work well for us. And again, with these tools, we're connecting closer to real time. So it's like we're sharing with each other, we're giving each other things back and forth, and it's getting close to real time. If you sit there with a Twitter client on your computer, and what a Twitter client is, if you don't know, it's just one way to access Twitter would be through your mobile phone, another way is through your browser, another way is to download a little application that sits on your desk and can show more than one Twitter account. It could show perhaps your Facebook account, and you can even set it up if you really want to be in the moment to beep like every time you get a message or you get an update. So that that's all a Twitter client is, and some of these things we'll be talking about our Twitter clients. All right, what I think is really important about this is that sometimes as, you know, journalists or just as educators, we would approach this and think, oh, we're going to control this, we're going to know what's happening. But real people are out there using this, so if you're hesitating about using it, and actually my examples, there's a couple of real people and one person is kind of unreal. So MC Hammer, does anybody remember Hammer Time?
Oh yeah.
Hammer is now going around doing social media lectures, and for all of his his accomplishments and perhaps his failings, he understands keeping his brand out there. He understands how he needs to communicate with people. He understands that he wants to be controlling what people think about him. So you can look at him on video at the Gravity Summit if you want. This is another Twitterer of note in Chicago. This is Ramon DeLeon. He has 6 pizza franchises. And you notice in the corner he's got his little logo on the video. This man has never put a picture on the internet that was not branded with his Domino's logo. He's so popular in Twitter that his Twitter name, Domino's has asked him to change his Twitter name because it's confusing people between like the stock and the real official Domino's logo or, you know, their handle in Twitter and their stock market thing, and this guy because he's always twittering. And he had some just brilliant ideas, and he's marketing pizza, but a lot of those same ideas, we could say we are marketing ideas. How could we market ideas more effectively? So you can ask me later about Ramon. And this is a favorite of mine. I don't know if you're from Chicago or you've ever been through there and been past those popcorn stores on the corner. And now Garrett's Popcorn has a blue popcorn bucket that twitters for it. And what I thought was interesting about this, she monitors every spelling of Garrett, and she monitors all the twitters about Garrett. And if you're in Chicago's loop and you suggest you've twittered about Garrett's and then you say you're having a bad day, she will often come to your office and bring you Garrett's popcorn. So again, you know, some of these marketing people, it's a little different, but their ideas, they could kind of expand our thinking about how we could sell a news product or good ideas to people. And then another thing that I've seen lately that really was interesting to me were social media metric tools. How do we measure this? So if we think there's a lot of buzz, that's great, but how would we quantify it and qualify it? And PR Newswire has this rollout of this new tool, and it includes a sentiment report, and it really impressed me. It's using language processing, and so it will go into, like, let's say you would search for Whole Foods, because recently they had a little to-do where there was like a big discussion in the social media sphere about them. You can go into their tweet stream with this tool, and it will tell you how many of the messages in Facebook, in Twitter, in the various social media are positive about what you search for, and how many are negative. And then it's really interesting to me, at least I like natural language kind of things. If you think that the message is wrong, like if somebody said that was wicked good, so maybe the machine had taken the thing wicked good and put it as a bad tweet, you can change it and the thing will learn from you then. The software is going to learn and become better over time. And this will give you all kinds of metrics. So again, this is what they're doing in the marketing, and I think we need to be thinking a little bit about how we can use things like this and how we can learn about what people think of us in this larger social world, and kind of get out of our own little silos. Yeah. Okay, and I think Google share real-time sharing with Google Wave is the next big thing.
Thank you. All right, JD.
Sure. Sorry. Okay, let me find my presentation. The clock is starting.
That's right.
All right. All right. So, okay. Hi, everybody. My name is JD Lassica. Thanks for coming out on a Saturday morning to the Hilton when you could be doing some other fun stuff. I understand there's a love parade starting right about now, right down the street. So if anybody wanders out later, I'll know where you're going to be going to. I'm glad to be back here at ONA. I'm one of the first original members of ONA. And what I like about this conference is that you guys, the vast majority of you guys already get this stuff. You don't have to sell new media. You don't have to sell social media to you guys. I think you're on board. What you want to do now is find out how to use all this stuff. So a quick retrospective. 12 years ago, I wrote the cover story in the American Journalism Review called Net Gain. And if any of you remember that story, it was all about how the news media needs to evolve its business model and practices away from being gatekeepers and towards being curators and guides and storytellers. And there was a lot of resistance to that. And we all know what's happened to the news industry since then. Back around 2000, 2001, Dan Gilmore and I were sort of barnstorming the country trying to get newspapers to start blogging. And there was a lot of resistance to that, too. Since then, so there's been like a revolution in citizen media. There's been the rise of citizen journalism. There's been an explosion of social networks. And there's a crazy name for all this stuff. It's, there's a name for all this crazy stuff called social media. But there's still resistance that I'm seeing in the news industry towards adopting some of the best practices here. So we're going to talk about what are some of the tools that we're going to be using, that we should be using. So my message to you today is that it's not too late. But tools also are not a strategy, and you've got to sit down with your team and sort of figure out where you want to go and take all this stuff. So the first thing is, take a deep breath. There's going to be a lot of slides in a very short amount of time. I'm actually trying to compress a 90-minute webinar into 15 minutes here. But if you go to your homework today is to copy down this one URL. It's delicious.com/socialmediacamp/ONA09. And that will show you about 90 different bookmarks of all the different kind of sites and articles that we're going to be referencing today. This presentation is also online already at slideshare.net/JDLassica. So earlier, about 10 minutes ago, we passed out some handouts around 6 Twitter tips for journalists and 8 ways to use social media in the newsroom. If you did not get it, there's some extra copies up here. They're also online. And you'll be able to sort of download them as you'd like to. So the 5 sort of areas that I want to sort of concentrate on today really quickly are community video, geotagging, how to enable local conversations, tapping into the sharing economy, and then, of course, we've got to talk about Twitter again. So on community video, here's a real opportunity, I think, that a lot of news organizations haven't really fully taken into account yet. I mean, video, they say by 2012 will account for 90% of all the traffic on the internet. So anything that we can do to sort of evolve around just traditional kind of text-based stories towards evolving into a sort of paradigm where video is part of your presentation, I think is a good thing. So there are all these kinds of new free video engagement sites out there. Kite, Quick, Ustream, Livestream, which is live streaming us right now. Flixwagon, Ucaster, they all do pretty much the same thing. They let you live stream any event. And you don't need like a big broadcast media studio. All you have to do is take your mobile phone out and get it set up correctly and hit go, and you're streaming live on the internet. And the nice thing is that it's also archived so that you can reference it later in your articles on your site. So, for example, PBS teamed with Impre Media, and they did live streaming of the Sonia Sotomayor hearings. They got 45,000 streams at the same time, and it was a very successful kind of enterprise. All right, we're going to talk about geotagging real quickly, and there'll be time for questions on all this stuff at the end. Some of you guys might remember about a year and a half ago the Minneapolis bridge collapse. This was a really amazing kind of example of crowdsourcing citizen journalism. A lot of people, instead of going to a traditional news site, they went on to Flickr. They started uploading photos that they took with their camera phones. And the nice thing about all these phones today is that they have geolocation enabled by default. So even the iPhone or some of these new Nokia phones, you don't have to really do much to set that up. So,
I just don't want you to hit the mic.
okay. So all you have to do is upload it to a Flickr account, and it will aggregate all the ones that are in a similar location. Then you hit, if you're a user, you just click on one of those pink dots there, and you see a photograph that was taken from these different various vantage points. Here's another example. Dan Gilmore went out with his students at Arizona State University, and they just did a little stroll around outdoor sculpture with G1 phones. And Dan said it took like 10 minutes to set up. All you have to do is have a Flickr account. And again, you take a photograph, you upload it, and you don't have to really do anything else. It's just automatically embedded into a map that can be found. So you can do this on your own site too. How many people here know what Every Block is? About half you guys. This is a site I think worth checking out. So Adrian Halavati, who won an award from the Knight Foundation for setting this up, now has rolled it out into 15 different cities. And it's basically the idea that you can sort of map different kinds of news events or information data on a Google map. And you get this stuff from various public databases. You can get it fed in from the local police department, can send it to maybe one of your freelancers to input, and then people on your site can sort of, map the walk that they take to work every morning and find out what kind of crimes have taken place along that route, or what kind of crimes have taken place in your neighborhood or around the school, real estate data, all sorts of uses for this. So it's already rolled out in 15 different cities. I understand they're willing to partner with news organizations so that they're not seeing themselves as being a destination site, they're seeing themselves as being a tool that you guys can use. There's lots of great examples of community photo albums, again on Flickr. One of my favorite sites is newwest.net. They cover the Rocky Mountain news. They've got over 18,000 photos up on their Flickr site. And instead of hiring a lot of photographers to go out in a time of constrained budgets, they let their users upload photos to this site, and then newwest.net displays it on the front page of their site, and it's some really outstanding photography. Okay, quickly about enabling conversations. Conversations in social media, most of it takes place, I think, these days on blogs or on websites, but basically the fundamental way that people converse online is through comments. So, some of you guys probably remember back in the 1990s, there's a website called Bug Me Not, where people can go to get sort of phony IDs to log into any news site in the country, because they didn't want to bother with the hassle of going in and registering and then forgetting their passwords and not getting it by email, and it was just too much, so they just use sites like this. Well, you know what? There's a new way to do this today, folks. You don't have to just have people log into your own site. They can log in through one of the social networks that they're already using. So somebody talked about this yesterday. Facebook Connect is magic, it's gold. And with tens of millions of people who are already online, they don't have to actually log in. All they have to do is click that button, and then they're on your site, and they're able to post a comment. What's really cool about this, though, is that they're using their real identities. It's not this bullshit, anonymous kind of whatever, where there's no kind of accountability. Their real name is being used, or their real kind of alias at some of these other sites like Twitter. So take this opportunity to look into that. Facebook Connect is really cool because not only is it a way to get people to comment on your site, it's a way for them to share your news story with their friends on Facebook. So the average number of news streams is sent out. The typical news stream is seen by like 40 different friends on Facebook. So it's like a way to multiply the distribution of your stories. Dig is something worth looking into. If there's a story on your site that gets popular on Dig, you can look for up to 250,000 new visitors. Google Friend Connect does something similar to Facebook Connect. Now, what's kind of irritating me a little bit is, and I'm still seeing stories, there was one in the Denver Post last month. Dan Lyons wrote an article about, how stupid Twitter is. This is just a couple weeks ago. And, that's fine. There are always going to be sort of people who oppose this kind of progress. What's kind of ironic here is if you look above his story, there's a way to share the story on Twitter. So even those who are a little bit skeptical will probably benefit from this in the end. Let's talk about widgets for a second. How many people here know what a widget is? Okay, a little more than half. So there are two kinds of widgets I want to talk about. One is the kind of widget that you can embed on your own site. And what that means is that a widget is basically a way to prettify an RSS feed. That's all a widget is, right? So here's a New York Times widget of their world news stories. The New York Times can put it on their site, or you can put it on your site. And it's updated in almost real time with little icons and photographs and articles. So it's really a lot prettier than just having like streaming headlines. There's another kind of widget, though, that I think is worth exploring, and that is a Twitter widget. So here's a Twitter widget created by Monitor MONITTER.com, and this is one that I built on my site called Social Bright. And what this is doing is it's pulling in any conversation in the Twitterverse around nonprofits or social justice. And you can do the same exact thing on your site around any topic, around geographic locations, around what's happening in your neighborhood, in your city, around your sports team, around editorial opinions, around topics, around your governor, and do the same thing. And so it doesn't even have to use a hashtag. All it has to do is look for a keyword. And this cost me like $500 to set up, to hire a programmer to figure out how to do this. It's not rocket science. So one of the biggest secrets that for some reason is still undiscovered in the newspaper industry is the sharing economy. And I'll explain what that means. I was at a publishers conference a couple of weeks ago up in Seattle, and I asked him how many people knew what Creative Commons was. 2 out of 30 people. So let's try that here. How many people know what Creative Commons is? All right, you guys. See, I'm telling you, guys know what you're doing. So Creative Commons is a way to sort of fine-tune your copyright. So number one, it's something you ought to be thinking about doing yourselves in releasing some of your stories or photographs under Creative Commons so you can get wider distribution out there online. People will be able to embed it, share it, drive traffic to your site. But number two, it's a really cool free source of material for you guys. So if you go to, for example, flickr.com/Creative Commons, a lot of people don't know about this. Tens of millions of photographs for free for commercial use. Now, there's not going to be a lot of really high-quality breaking news photos. There are going to be some, but for graphics, for illustrating articles, for your magazines, for things like that, this is a really great resource. And it's not, and it's really okay to use it. People, say, well, I can't just take it. Well, what you can do is just take it and attribute it to the photographer, and they'd be thrilled. That's why they're putting it up there under these kinds of licenses. So, how many? We got a few more minutes, right? So, free, here's another message to you guys. Free is not the enemy, you've been reading a lot of articles about how free is going to be the downfall of the newspaper industry. Well, it works both ways. You guys can use free too. There's free content out there, like I just mentioned with the photographs. There's free videos that you can embed on your site. TED Talks are just exquisite photo videos that can be used on topics of interest to your readers. There's free music and audio that you can embed and download. I've got a site called socialbright.org/sharing center with a hyphen, and there's dozens of different resources there that you can see. I'm trying to tailor it to both nonprofits and to a journalism crowd. There are free camps that are being held around the country all the time, bar camps, pod camps, word camps. Social Media Club probably has a presence in your city. I would recommend you guys or some of your reporters going out to some of these events and seeing what are the latest kinds of tools and social media networks that people are using. Free platforms too if you're interested in something that's beyond your CMS, WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, Kaltura. All right, so let's talk about Twitter for a second. This is becoming the Twitter conference, which is really kind of cool. Evan was here yesterday. There's something called MediaOnTwitter.com. This is a place to see where most of the journalists who have Twitter accounts, you can find them here by listing by their newspaper. There's something called muckrack.com, which is an aggregation of different kind of professional journalists who Twitter. The only thing I don't like about them is I've asked them twice to include me and they haven't, so maybe I should sort of boycott them. But other than that, it's a pretty good site to sort of keep your pulse on what's happening with journalists on Twitter. There are a lot of journalists. I'm really glad to see what's happened in the past year. This has sort of moved out of the ghetto of, technology or the social media writer, and now everybody is using Twitter, right? So there's health writers, there's business writers, James Janega of the Chicago Tribune is a general assignment reporter. All these guys are using it in the right way. and some folks aren't. So Dan, another Dan who doesn't get Twitter. Here's a guy you should follow probably. Omar G on Twitter, and he's a reporter for the Austin American Statesman, and he really knows how to Twitter. So he doesn't just go out there and write about his own stories and expect, wow, everybody's going to retweet me. He engages in a conversation with his readers. And so that's my 75-25 rule. I think, for every broadcast-style tweet that you make on your site, on Twitter, about something that you've done or pointing to an article on your newspaper, you ought to have 3 conversational tweets. You ought to be answering somebody, you ought to be retweeting people, you ought to be talking about funny stuff that you've seen online, talking about what you've done that's kind of interesting over the weekend, things like that. So think about adding that kind of human level to Twitter. I'll wrap it up. So here are different ways, and Evan talked about some of these things yesterday, how journalists can use Twitter. I think a lot of you probably have heard of some of the examples of using Twitter for breaking news. So there was the San Diego wildfires a couple years ago. There was the Red River flooding in North Dakota this past spring. Curation, I think, is an undervalued kind of ability of journalists. I mean, this is your sweet spot. You know how to curate, you know how to aggregate, point to the good stuff. We're seeing more and more reporters like David Green of NPR saying that they're using Twitter to sort of find out what they should ask their next interview subject. So he's been doing that quite a bit. What I like about Twitter is that you ask a question of your followers and they'll always point to you in a really cool direction as far as, oh, you ought to talk to this person, or it's a way to find news sources, away from your stale Rolodexes of the usual suspects, and it's a really good way to sort of get women and persons of color involved. You can use it for social events. The Chicago Tribune uses it to do tweet-ups. All right, lots of ways. And of course, to broadcast your story. So one quick note about this slide. We're trained as journalists to be objective, to sort of stand above it all, to be sort of outside of the story. Well, that doesn't work on Twitter. You have to sort of be human. You have to be yourself. You should have personality. You should unlearn some of those conventions of objectivity and start, listening and conversing, and then be conversational, not a detached observer. And it's already working for some publications. Which the New York Times says 10% of its traffic is now coming from Twitter. One page that I like a lot is the Austin American Statesman. So if you've got several Twitter accounts, don't confuse your readers by sending them all over the place. Have a landing page. Just aggregate everything and make it really easy for people to find your reporters and editors who are tweeting. One of the things you'll find in the handout that I sent out is how to find local people in the Twitterverse in your town or city. So you want to find them. You want to find the people who have a large number of followers, and you want to make friends with them. And that means you have to converse exactly with them. Hashtags, I don't really have time to explain too much what hashtags are, but it's really something to look into. You can jump into conversations that are already happening, or you can start your own conversation. Use a hashtag. If you go to journchat.info, you'll see this widget, which is actually pulling in every conversation in Twitter that has this hashtag of journchat. And so in the handout, you'll see all these different applications. You'll see how to do real-time web search. You'll see how you can get Twitter and some other kind of mobile applications on your iPhone or BlackBerry, I suppose. There are ways to measure how you're doing in Twitter by using Bitly, TweetStats, Twitterholic, some of these other tools. And the newest kind of thing is you can report live from the field with TwitCam and just use your mobile device and then do a Twitter chat with your users while you're at a news event. Okay, and to echo what Barbara says, pay attention to the wave. It's coming, it's going to be big, and it's something that I think journalism is going to be able to use quite a bit. Google Wave at wave.google.com.
Did anybody get Wave already?
And my last slide is basically You know what? Newspaper websites are going to evolve drastically in the next few years, and I think they're not going to look like this. They're going to look more like, oh God, they're going to look more like this, or they're going to look more like this. But what they have in common is that, you know, they sort of throw away some of the conventions that we've been sort of living with for the past 15 years, and they're not afraid to embrace the conversation out there.
Great, thank you.
So that's what I've got. Thanks.
Okay, Steve is going to come up, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments.
No, I'm going to stay in my chair.
Other change in plans, he's going to sit down.
And I don't have a PowerPoint, so. Actually, I've been monitoring, as Rita mentioned, monitoring the Twitter feed, and there's much interest in talking about some of the ethical implications of social media, which I'm going to try and cover. But I'll just share with you a couple of things that have come across Twitter. One from one of the Twitterers from South America talking about social media. A joke that involved an ethical question. Some days social media is more not working than networking, which given the connectivity issues the past couple of days is fairly appropriate. And then probably my favorite tweet of the entire conference comes from Amanda Ash, who says that social media is like the Woodstock for internet hippies. I like that one. Andy Mendelson from Temple University, kind of getting at some of the ethical issues, tweeted, "I think people care even more where the news comes from. They want it vetted by someone they trust, thus the value of retweets." And I think what you've been seeing a lot lately with news organizations is in the setting of policies and with social media is trying to somehow get at this notion of preserving the notion of objectivity, but also getting at this notion of trust. How to walk this balancing line between maintaining trust with the readers and also embracing this new area. Much of the discussion lately, I mean, probably the most prominent policy out there recently is the Washington Post policy. But this sounds familiar, doesn't it? Haven't we been here before? I mean, haven't we been talking about what journalists should be doing, they shouldn't be doing? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago, weren't we talking about our bloggers journalists? Should journalists be blogging? Flash forward to 2009, and we have, most all mainstream news organizations have their reporters, some of their editors out there blogging, using blog technology to be relevant, to get their stories out there. So we figured it out. And it's become more, it's more about the journalist, the individual figuring it out. The journalist is now, you are the writer, you're the reporter, they're the editor. That was taboo. I mean, I remember a few years ago at an ONA conference, Jeff Jarvis relating a story about a story he wrote for some news organization, I forget who it was, and they came back with some pretty heavy edits, and he was all not happy about it. And he posted his entire story on his blog. And there was like this hush throughout the room. It's like, you posted without an editor? But now that's happening. We've evolved, and it's been the role of the journalists and less the policies of news organizations, and that's kind of where we are at now. And it's like, the journalist is the brand now. The individual is the brand. You work for a news organization, you're responsible to a news organization, but at the same time, there's a lot of responsibility with you, and that's ultimately what it comes down to when we're talking about the ethics of social media and what you should or shouldn't be doing. But to kind of help the conversation along a little bit, I came up with a list, since we love lists as journalists and social media people. So basically, a highlight of 5 lists, and kind of meant more to prompt the discussion, because we want to get to Q&A here as well. But number 1, and I'm quoting one of my favorite editor friends right now, is don't be a dumbass. I mean, seriously, use your head. You're out there representing yourself. You're out there representing your news organizations. Your actions have ramifications. I tell this to my students all the time. Listen, you have a digital footprint out there. People are following you. People are going to see it. Think before you do something. oh, this is a great idea, I should tweet this. No, think it through. I mean, it's pretty basic stuff, but there's a lot of dumbass stuff going on out there. Number 2, listen. How many of you are tweeting? How many of you just heard what I said? Thank you for making my point. It's a weird thing. I mean, it's you know, the brain works in weird ways. It's tough to be writing and listening at the same time. Many of us have done it over the years as reporters, but you know, if back in the day, if I were out there covering a city council meeting and I was going to try and tweet it, I would be tweeting the first things were said and missing the third and fourth and fifth things that were said that were probably providing context that made the first tweet a lot more fuller. I had students go out, as an assignment, I had students, you know, tweet a debate, and they were overwhelmed. And that, I mean, that holds true for journalists as well. Take it in. Listen to what's happening if you're at a news event. You know, over time, tweeting can become an issue. One of the great examples of tweeting working was the Mumbai attacks. So you had the eyewitness accounts. You didn't have major news organizations there. You had people who were there tweeting, providing perspective, providing information as to what was happening. What happened over time is that it became a rumor mill. People were speculating, oh, I heard this group's responsible, oh, the cops are talking about this, but it had no foundation in fact. That kind of gets back to what Evan Williams was saying yesterday, is that there's very much still a need for journalists to collate this information, to provide analysis, to provide perspective. And it's good for eyewitness stuff, but you got to provide that perspective as well. I'll get through the other real quickly here. Number 3, don't oversell your headlines. This is a real conundrum. I see a lot of this out there. We're in more of a competitive environment than we've ever been in, and it's extending to Facebook and to Twitter. But more and more I'm seeing people overselling their headlines. You know, my favorite example is a journalist friend I know tweeted right after, like a week after Michael Jackson died, that they were looking at the doctor as possibly connected with homicide investigation. So I click in, and it's a one-sentence, anonymous, one source, anonymous TMZ piece. And I'm like, all right, come on, you know? You oversold it to me. I was expecting a little bit more here. And his argument was, well, you know, TMZ's been right in this story. I'm like, yeah, but anybody who's ever covered cops knows that a cop investigation covers a heck of a lot of ground, you know, and you know, still, it hasn't been resolved. He's been looked at. I mean, it proved that he was being looked at, but it's still out there. Nothing's really happened. Number 4, privacy issues. I mean, this is another really weird area for journalists, and kind of raises some ethical and very practical issues. There's a semi-private nature to Facebook. So what do journalists use when they're reporting off of Facebook? We had a UMass student who committed suicide during a study abroad program, and one of the student journalists who was blogging for the local newspaper immediately went to the Facebook page of the student, and there was a lot of condolence messages on there, so he kind of took that and used that in his reporting. The backlash was bad. I mean, it was fierce. They would not let him into the memorial service. So that there's a certain perspective from journalists in that this is a semi-public place where I can get information, but then for the public, it's a semi-private area. So where's the ethical line here? What are we going to do? You know, best course of action? You see condolence messages. In this case, condolence messages. Maybe you try and contact the people directly and talk to them rather than pulling stuff off of the page. Number 5, retweeting. I mean, you are implicitly endorsing something when you retweet something. To say otherwise is just plain silly. If you think something is just interesting, I see people, journalists retweeting because it's just interesting. Well, okay, say that. But also check out the information. You're putting your name and you're putting the name of your news organization on something. You're endorsing it by passing it along. You know, these are things, again, things that are kind of basic, but really, you know, time to think these things through. Finally, a lot of debate lately over whether reporters and editors should be Facebooking and tweeting, and whether or not you need to have a personal account as well as a private account, or whether you use both, you know, your personal as professional. I mean, I think it comes down to common sense and transparency. If you're using it as to interview people and to gather sources, let people know that you're doing that. But there's a strong argument out there for separating your personal and your professional. It provides clarity for you as a journalist and for your sources and your users. But again, the bottom line is don't be a dumbass.
Okay. All right, great. Well, we're going to open it up for comments and questions. There is a mic in the middle of the room if you want to step up to the mic.
I wanted to just mention Breaking Tweets. If you haven't seen that, that's a curated site by a journalist, and it's not real time, but he's actually going out there and trying to verify who tweets and write a little connected to traditional news and that.
Hey, now I can read one of them. Elizabeth Weiss with USA Today. If you guys could all spell out the URLs of the, because we can't read them back there, but wait till I get back to my computer so I can write them down. Good, thanks.
Sure thing, Elizabeth.
Any other comments, questions? And just to remind you that JD's presentation is online. You can get that later.
Yeah, all the URLs are there. I have a question for Steve. Are you actually allowed to have a professional and a personal Facebook account? I always thought they were restricted to one.
Yeah, I've seen it. Actually, they've had several, yeah. I mean, and also with Twitter too, there are multiple accounts.
Well, Twitter, I know you can do that. If you find one on Facebook, send me a link because I've never seen it. And you know what? I don't know whether there's going to be a conversation at this conference about social media policies, but I think there should be like an entire hour and a half devoted to it because I think the newspaper industry is totally off the wall in what they're doing today with social media policies and restricting journalists from being humans on these social networks. I wrote a blog post about it yesterday on socialmedia.biz.
I mean, just to clarify, it's a different name, so they're not using their same name. So that may be where you're not saying it is that they've come under a different name with their professional stuff.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, question about uses for Twitter and obtaining sources, and you mentioned the use of getting questions, suggestions for questions before an interview, that type of thing. All this implies that you have a large number of followers already. Do you have any suggestions on how you would obtain followers if you're not the local beat reporter in the major metropolitan daily or TV correspondent, or whatever? Maybe you're a blogger just starting off. How would you go about getting followers so you can tap into these sources?
Good question.
I don't think the rules for getting followers is any different for reporters or journalists or editors than it is for anybody else on Twitter. I think you have to engage in conversations. You can't. The first rule of Twitter is it's not all about you, right? So you have to retweet people. It makes sense strategically to follow people with a large number of followers, and kiss up to them. I'm sorry, a lot of it's about schmoozing. But it's also about sort of finding your niche in the Twitterverse. So you want to sort of become an expert in a certain kind of area and then sort of connect and have conversations with other people who are also tweeting about the same kinds of things, and then you'll see people start following you organically. If you're at a conference like this one, it's nice to tweet about stuff that's relevant and use hashtags, and then people who are not in the room are going to start following you because they'll discover you that they probably didn't know that you were out there in the first place.
Let's take the next question.
I don't think it's a one policy thing either. It very much gets back to linked journalism and the fact that if you do a story, you should be sending it out in as many different venues as possible. Twitter being one of them, Facebook being another, your blog being another. So you're getting out. It's a multi-pronged strategy. It's not just Twitter alone. It's all these different tools.
Okay, Go ahead, ma'am.
Oh, hi. I'm Angela Pimenta from Exame Magazine in Brazil. It's a business magazine, and my question is to Steve Fox. I'd like you to comment about separating your public and your personal persona, so to speak. I started blogging like 2 months ago, and I'm getting a lot of some insulting email on my company email mailbox, and that happens, it's because I'm dealing with politics, and in Brazil we have a presidential campaign already going on. So which kind of privacy should I deserve when blogging, if any?
Yeah, I guess there are a lot of questions there. I've never gotten hate mail, so, but I mean, it's a lot easier. There's definitely, you know, between blogs and Facebook and Twitter profiles, you are going to get a lot of stuff, you know. But I mean, it's, you know, if you separate the two, at least, you know, you don't have, you know, if you just had one, so you're saying you do have a professional profile, if you had them combined, they might be attacking your family as well. I mean, and that's kind of one of the things that from your personal point of view that you probably want to separate.
Do you have anonymous blogging in Brazil? Yeah, I think sometimes it depends on different countries whether you can, you know, there's who can blog or who can email and send things anonymously, and that, of course, leads to worse conduct than where your email is identified as being from a person.
Kurt Cagle, Managing Editor for XMLtoday.org. I Twitter fairly regularly. I've got about 1,500 followers. One of the things that I find very fascinating is the fact that a significant number of the of the Twitter followers that follow me are people who are basically marketing how to be more effective at Twitter. I'm just kind of curious about your take on Twitter and Twitter spam and the intrinsic desire to basically make a buck.
I try to screen a lot of the people that follow me, and because there are, like, you know, maybe 4 to 1 like marketing spam like that. And I think Twitter has actually cracked down on that some too. But yeah, I mean, as much as you can, just look at them and then block them from following you. It's sort of like, you know, when you had to do that with your junk mail filter.
Hi, I'm Lisa Lynch. I'm a journalism professor from Concordia University in Montreal. I wanted to get back to the Post thing just quickly because, I mean, the issues that came up concerning the Post policy were about the idea of tweeting personal things, of course, but then there was this whole conversation about process. And one of the things that the Post was really trying to clamp down on was any kind of tweets revealing process. That is, I'm reporting, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And that's been a very, even for journalists who draw a separation between the personal and the professional, that kind of professional tweeting or personal professional tweeting has been very important for a lot of journalists. So I just wanted to get some comment on that.
Yeah, I got an opinion about that. You know what? Back in the 90s, there's a whole stream of newspapers that hired ombudsmen to sort of be the filter between the public, you know, the unwashed masses and the professional journalists. Well, now every journalist, every editor on your newspaper who has a Twitter account has the ability to reach the public directly without that intermediation. I think there's fear in the hallways and the executive suites of newspapers, but I think it's inevitable that this is sort of going to evolve to a point where there's got to be more transparency around the journalistic process. Journalism is not a black art. You know, it's not high priests who are performing some magic ritual. It's a process of humans who are doing their best, making decisions that are going to be different from day to day and from newspaper to newspaper around what constitutes news. And I think the more that people see that that news is not coming from this kind of corporate institutional machinery, and the more they see that there are people that are struggling with how to present the news on a daily basis, the more they're going to be sympathetic to the media. You know, people hate the media right now, and I think that's one reason they hate the media, because they don't understand what the people in this room are doing. You know, they see it as the lawyers and the corporate executives. They don't see it as the journalists.
And that reminds me of the Clue Train Manifesto, which is now like in its second printing. And I mean, the Clue Train site is closed down. It's like a national historical site or something. But when that was written, I mean, a lot of that showed in Toyota and different manufacturers where it was the interaction between like the workers twittering, well, actually in that time it was email about their business and the bosses. And you know, you can't, we're in a worldwide conversation, and you can't step out of it and maintain credibility with the public when everyone around you, when Ramon the pizza guy is transparent, I think the newspapers have to be transparent.
Transparency, I think, is easy to talk about, but really difficult to do, especially for journalists that have been doing it the other way for a very long time. And it's scary. But I think that in the end, it's the way that you build audience. I mean, a lot of people have been commenting on Twitter about how Facebook and Twitter allows journalists to be human and be personal. Well, letting your readers know how the story's going, letting them know the process, letting them know the issues that you're running into is another way to connect, and an important way to connect. And in the end, probably or possibly a way to develop sources and get information from folks.
We've got 5 minutes, so the last 2 questions.
Alex Schaefer with Southern California Public Radio. Is there any good social media policy out there?
Maybe the Pointer one? Kelly McBride at Pointer suggested one. I think that issue came up on the pointer.org around the time when Obama was elected, and the question was, were a lot of journalists really happy about Obama being elected and therefore tweeting that? And, that was an interesting ethical discussion.
What was the name?
Pointer.org, P-O-Y.
The author.
Kelly McBride.
Kelly McBride.
So, I mean, any policy is going to have holes in it. I mean, I think the key to a policy is that, it's got to be flexible. So that it can't be, if you do this wrong, you're going to be suspended or fired. I mean, you got to have a certain amount of flexibility built into it.
Let me say one last thing, because this is an important question. The trouble with 99% of these newspaper social media policies is that they're don't do lists. They're don't do this, don't do that, you're going to get in trouble if you do this. And there's almost nothing out there in the newspaper realm about what you should be doing. So I'm developing a model social media policy that is not just for newspapers, but for corporations too, for employers. We'll be doing that in the next couple of weeks, but it's all about what are some of the best practices, what are some of the pitfalls, things to avoid, but we need to focus more on how social networks and Twitter and Facebook can benefit news organizations if they're used in smart, creative ways.
Our last question.
Thank you. My name is David Newland. I'm with Canoe.ca, which is a major Canadian web portal. We have a blog called the Canoe Dossier. It's at Canoe Dossier for those following on Twitter. And as with any blog, of course, you want to bring in comments and so forth, and you've spoken to the value of those. What I find is that every time I write a blog piece, I post it to my Facebook group, my own Facebook profile, and the quality of the conversation is greater, and in fact the quantity of the conversation is greater in that realm. And of course I know why that is, because the 700 people or so that I have on Facebook know me, trust me, and trust my friends by extension. So I'm really happy from a content point of view that conversation is occurring in that space, and it goes to a question about trust networks. I think that's the best place for that to happen, but when you come back to try to monetize or capture that or bring it back up to the portal, you've got a problem. And I'm not sure that those same commenters would comment in the public space, and so I'm just wondering if you can discuss that.
I think Google Wave is going to address that, but I mean, and that seems to me, just in my own use of social media, that I'm moving more and more to saying, I've got all these separate things, what will bring them together? So, I mean, I think that will be the next move, is an integration of things. But as far as business and having a boss or a management control it, I don't.
I think it's really fascinating what's happened on the web in the last 2 or 3 years, and Facebook needs to be credited with a lot of this. The fact that they've evolved our internet culture away from this group of anonymous commenters to people who are sort of owning up to their own identities and standing behind it, and in fact wanting to build an online identity. So, the quality from one social network to another, from one platform to another, will vary, so you have to see what works for you. Sometimes it's going to be Twitter or Facebook. Hopefully you're going to be able to, I don't know if you're going to be able to monetize those folks, but if you start thinking about having a conversation with them that drives value, you're going to be better off in the long run.
I was hoping we could get through this without talking about monetizing, but it's again, I think it's about building audience, and I think from the way you laid it out, that you're out there and you're garnering an audience through all these different tools and having a conversation with them, and that will lead to the money end of it. Once you start having them come and keep coming back.
The management is not using the internet the way a lot of people are, just even regular people. And so some of that problem of people realizing, oh, well, we're not going to lose anything from bringing in this good stream of quality from outside, I think it's only going to be solved by time and like layoffs and retirements.
And on that note, thank you to our panelists.
Thanks very much. And if you haven't gotten a copy, the two handouts are up here.
Thank you to our panelists, and thank you so much for attending.